Hi, time for another episode of The Thought Project, just so you know, and this would be episode 10 of July 2023. Thank you. I'm just starting out with a really old dance song from the 90s called Mr. President by Coco Jumbo. And I'm not playing the whole thing.
Put me up, put me down, put my feet back on the ground. Put me up, take my heart and make me happy. Put me up, put me down, put my feet back on the ground. Put me up, feel my heart and make me happy. Here we go, getting smooth to the groove. Watching lovely ladies as I move, as they move. 'Cause that's what they say.
Got it. So I'm going to stop this song right now. Anyways, really fun dance song in the 90s, sort of indicative of the decade as far as music. I mean, there were other bands, but, in the earlier part of the decade, it was a lot of sort of angsty, like Nirvana and Pearl Jam type stuff. And then the later part of the decade, you had No Doubt, and you still had these dance songs kind of stepping their way through the 90s, or cha-chaing their way through the 90s. Anyway, so it was actually an oldie but goodie as far as I'm concerned. Let's start out today by talking about this whole thing with Burisma is really weird. Because what came out last week was that there were some documents declassified by Senator Grassley of Iowa. He's a senator that's around for forever. I thought he was fantastic, actually, having come from the state for part of my life and knowing about all the problems there and just the hellishness of the state. But I also kind of feel like he's like fighting an upward battle sometimes. So he declassified some documents that showed that $5 million had been paid to Hunter Biden, another $5 million to President Joe Biden from Milo Zertlesky. He's the owner of the natural gas company Burisma. That's what they're still going through in Congress. There's some tax evasion issues there, and then there's also the fact that he very bizarrely demanded that the Bidens somehow kill off a Ukrainian prosecutor to make sure that he was actually fired from his job. Well, that's not something the Bidens really control. That's the Ukrainian government. And the time that it was asked for was back in like 2016. And this was according to an unnamed FBI informant. And there's another witness that's named Alexander Ostemko. It's just a really weird story. And, I'm just wondering because Burisma was tied back to the agency out in Hollywood that I had had some problems with, other people have, because it's essentially a front group. That's not a real agency. So when I say the agency in all these videos, I'm not talking about a U.S. agency. I'm talking about the Hollywood agency that's essentially a solo organization. It's a pretty big one. So, believe me, they're going to get there. They're going to get through all this and get there. So, let's talk about China for a minute. You got an issue here that Kathy Wood, who is an extremely rich technology innovation fund owner, has pulled her fund out of China. It's called ARK Innovation ETF. It's worth $9 billion in assets, and she's pulled it out. On top of that, Henry Kissinger has now been trying to meet with Xi Jinping, which is really strange because Kissinger is kind of like the last person anybody wants to be representing the U.S. But the Chinese have decided we're no fun to talk to anymore because Janet Yellen won't do whatever he wants, and nobody else will either. So he wants to talk to Kissinger. It's like a blast from the past. It's like he wants to go visit an ex that he really enjoyed. Because Kissinger really doesn't influence or change U.S. policy anymore. Kissinger has really been pretty thoroughly debunked, even by among the Democrats. I was 19 years in D.C. I know what people thought about Kissinger. I mean, you might as well just go talk to, could be just talking to a buddy, really, like to console him. Their housing economy has completely dropped, and they've got negative inflation now, and Kissinger was just a weird Nazi that never did any favors for anybody. At least he always did favors for the CCP and the rest of us. I wouldn't listen to anything he ever said. So I don't really trust anybody who ever said they liked him. Just how it is. So, and it needs to be noted that Russia has bombed Odessa and damaged the Chinese consulate there. And this came at the same time as a discussion with Ukrainians over economics, or supposed discussion. It's a very sketchy story because it's being painted immediately. So one article is that the Ukrainians were vowing to protect Chinese assets there. And there's just this weird history, why would the Chinese be suddenly meeting with Ukrainians, but then they've also tried to take credit for strides made with Ukraine. It just creates a really weird dynamic to discredit the Ukraine, I think. Because this comes at a point where the U.S. Department of Defense just last week announced that there will no longer be any relationships with Chinese military in any U.S. schools, any of them. And it's very much an article that was released on a Friday to hide. It was a dump. It was a Friday dump. It's a major change in U.S. policy. And then this happens. Whoa. Like, you need to get worried. Like, because they're clearly, I think it's a clear attempt on the part of Russia to try to create a lack of distrust. I'm sorry, a lack of trust and create distrust in the Ukraine when the two are so closely set up. You know, so way too close together as far as events go. So, and just trying to think where I want to go next with this. I know I make this show super dry. I kind of dance at the beginning, and I'm like, oh. You know, when I talk about this sort of holiday agency, the reason I knew anything about it is because I was trafficked and forced to work for them as a kid. And then they tried to do the exact same thing to me as an adult. And I worked really hard to get investigations done. And I struggled in dealing with these really corrupt government employees who wanted payoffs and were just rude and would say, well, what do they want? We'll just go to whatever Kendrick wants. I call the guy I found it Kendrick. And because I don't want to say his real name in a video. But if I did, I don't really think it would matter because I have so much evidence against them that it's like, what are they going to do? I mean, other than what the crap they put me through anyways. You know, following me around on jobs, trying to keep me from working. Because Kendrick actually said to me that, you know, when I was trying to graduate from college, he said, well, you're not going to be allowed to have any jobs. You're just going to have to work for free for us and have no money. Does that even make sense? People have to have money. People have to have housing. People have to be able to survive. I mean, he was crazy enough to talk about putting people on disability. He's actually disabled people or done worse. I mean, there were 2 women I saw down in Charlottesville who had exercised their right to die. You need to also consider something else, that my mom, before she was murdered, had a husband, and he was older. And there was a questionable situation with his son, who was a computer software developer. And he was injured in 2001 with a complex brain injury that caused his head to become concave. And people used to argue, was he a good guy? You know, was he for me? Was he against me? Was he trying to fix the problem? Was he trying to reprogram some of the signal systems to help me? What was he doing? It doesn't matter. The point is that he was a victim in all of it, and another witness, and somebody who understood those systems, good or bad. And the courts, you never know how it would have played out. And he was injured to the point of having a head injury that's actually concave, like it went inward concave, and hardly able to talk. And this happened out in LA. So if you don't think there's been hits on people, or like a long list of people that have been severely injured that are still out there, you're crazy. Like, dudes running a company just think they're all going to hang out, and there's all these people who've been injured and murdered, and, you know, because obviously the dead really can't talk, but there's all people who've been injured, all this has been recorded, there's a lot of people like me, and we've all done our work and put our time in, you know, no matter what happens, it's like, this thing is rolling forward. You know, you've seen a lot of major U.S. policy changes. I'm just trying to figure out why the government is holding up on anything as far as trying to be nice to this agency. Please stop pretending or trying to protect the U.S. citizenship or anybody else. You don't need to baby us about a corrupt agency. We're all well aware of how shell organizations work out in Hollywood. And we've seen the bad material that they produce in an attempt to cover up what they're really doing, which is running drugs and children. Trading children. And bizarre snuff porns. Which is disgusting. Russian mafia stuff that's gross. Does anybody feel sorry for WGA or SAG, which are clearly shell organizations? Because you can go join SAG if you're part of the Russian mafia or work for them and have no experience. Same with WGA. Bunch of people getting paid big salaries and not doing any work. What's an agency? What's a Hollywood agency with a bunch of supposed artists that don't do any art, that have to have other people do it for them? What's an agency that has a bunch of supposed agents that don't have ideas of their own and have somebody else do work for them? They're not. That's what a shell company is. They end up having to traffic people to cover up what they're doing. So on top of running the drugs, the sex trafficking, the abuse of kids, the mangled bodies, the dead people, you've got all these victims of labor trafficking that are being forced to work for them because they're doing something that's completely and totally illegal and disgusting in the Russian mafia. And then a lot of this was all set up at the end of the late 80s when the Soviet Union started to fall. So conversely, with all of this at the same time happening, the movie theater demand is not what it once was. The Forbes actually tracked it in back in 2022, but it's still relevant. None of the films that you've come out this summer have reached 1 billion, and none of them will. None of them are going to be coming back, and they're all using outdated basic goals for profits, so there's nobody who's going to fix it for them. I'm certainly not. I used to criticize the industry until I realized it led to people being stupid and talking to me too much about telling me to work for free. Now I'm like, you know what? Figure it out on your own. You think I'm stupid? Think I deserve to be paid? Well, you don't need me. That's a great comeback to somebody who doesn't want to pay you for work. You say, well, clearly you don't need me. Clearly you've got all the answers. Clearly you say you're talented and they're not my ideas, they're yours. Well, then clearly you don't need me. They will literally sit and stare at you in shock. I've had very big men who are extremely violent literally become dumbfounded when I said that to them. So try that if you have a problem. Really, it works. I must call it like how to deal with lunatics if you have to. Generally, you just want to run away if you can. So, because I went through was really weird. Um, you're dealing with people who are greedy. They're completely out of touch with reality. They don't understand cause and effect, and they're more likely to try to think of weird ways, if you tell them no, to try to beat you up. I clearly had to get the U.S. military involved to get it to stop, and then to get out. But, I mean, these people were actually threatening to attack the U.S. Capitol. Like, that's how bad things were and have been. So, no, I don't feel bad for the WGA or the SAG. That's WGA. That's the Western Writers Guild, the Western chapter. They have an Eastern chapter. But they're extremely rude over emails and communications, and they're very much part of the Russian mafia now. They really just totally have been completely scooped out, which is something the Russians are really big on doing with organizations to create a shell organization. So, it's just an example. But don't feel sorry for these people. Focus on going for walks, find out ways to entertain yourself, look at alternative types of entertainment, performance. There are a lot of people who I was going through who didn't really care if, a part of my survival was just to provide bad material until I could get away because I wasn't getting paid for anything. And never had an agent, none of that. And I think it's important to note that Kendrick made a lot of really weird statements to be like that he wanted to marry me, or he'd be my agent at some other point, or if I was just more talented. And then he turned around and said I was really beautiful and I was totally marriageable. And he totally, it was like, shut up. Like the guy was just full of it. He's completely weird. And he actually goes to the bathroom in public. He gets mad and throws temper tantrums in meetings and literally defecates in public. If you know what that means, it means he relieves himself in public. It means he actually takes poops in public. It means he takes dumps in public in business meetings when he gets angry at people. He's a completely horrible, weird Russian oligarch, and he has no business operating a company in this country or even having started one. And he did it with my father's money and a lot of money from me. And who knows how many other people he did the same thing to. So, whenever the U.S. government wants to get around to like shutting that place down, rolling out the military and just finishing this place off would be really great. Because I'm pretty sure we could all skip another bad movie, which has weird Russian propaganda in it, because that's what they are. Just skip it. So, I would like to note, the Wall Street Journal ran an article on how the best summer vacation in the U.S. may actually be in Michigan. And they were focusing on a Traverse City, which has really beautiful wineries and beaches. And Lake Michigan, of course, is like blue, like Jamaican water, blue. It's extremely cold. And then, of course, Lake Huron is always nice to swim in. I mean, it's always much warmer and very beautiful and available. So it's a state with a lot of coastline and a lot of really fun stuff to do despite the longer winters. So anyways, I just think it's really interesting. It doesn't have the same problems as some of the other states that do have a lot of coastline. Like California and Florida have a lot of coastline, but they have a lot of other problems that people really don't want to deal with. And like Virginia has a lot of problems. They've got a lot of coastline. So with Michigan, it's just that the state has all this coastline, but then it's also landlocked. So they don't have the issues of people just being able to literally like drive up in their ship or vessel and get off and disembark onto the land that California and Florida have, or some of the other coastal states have. So just thought, but I've enjoyed being up here. It's very calm, very peaceful here. So, and there's a ton of coastline and beaches. So, anyways, that's my thought. But, I think Michigan would be very happy if things stay really nice and calm and peaceful. I don't really think they're interested in drama. So, I had a thought on all of this, and something I've thought of many times, which is that I'm very big on, I really support the U.S. military, but I also hate the idea of the U.S. military being sent all over the world. And I say that because I've seen many times the Russians and Chinese, just looking at military strategy myself, create conflicts in our countries, and we always go. We're always just like ready to run to the problem. And we really need our military here in the U.S. because there's way too many people being trafficked and beat up by Russian, Iranian, Albanian activity here in the U.S. And you've seen it play out in the last 2 years. You know? Just, I mean, look at what's happened. And I saw it all that the people involved were clearly tied to Russian Albanian networks. I saw what happened at Luther College. You know, it's probably happened at other schools, but I can't think of another school that had that many people who were that dangerous all fanning out. And, you know, shell companies tied to them and international, transnational crime, and the rest of us are just like, you know, and the government knew about all of it and they didn't stop it. This whole philosophy of sending our troops way abroad and the other part of, you know, doing investigations by letting the crime happen is not productive. We really need our troops here in the U.S. to take care of us, and we actually really need to stop. Like, that investigation strategy theory was actually debunked while I was in the D.C. area. So I think the last time you saw a campaign like that exposed, I call it a campaign, but an operation like that exposed was a Fast and Furious campaign that went so wrong under Obama. The government decided to stop doing those because they really just don't work. You know, the whole idea of sending out the product and watching where it goes just doesn't work, because what happens is that the weirdos get the product and then they just run off with it and continue being weird and just end up funding their criminal activity. You're not actually stopping it. So what Americans for myself also was, stop putting me in a position where I'm basically being extorted from and beat up and I'm not allowed to work a regular job and make income and have employment, which I have a right to. And, you know, stop these people that have bothered me. Because Kendrick has a network of people that try to stop me from working at all. And you're showing up at jobs and harass me and all kinds of things. And there has to be, that has to stop. I mean, because that's still kind of been an issue, actually. Came back up again in Charlottesville. But also, you know, you're just funding the crime. So that was my argument for putting an end to a lot of it. I have a number of good arguments, but, and clearly I was friends with a lot of lawyers, but, you know, I'm an intelligent person myself, thought through all this stuff. Let's talk about something really weird, but it's kind of funny. Veronica Rajek, she's supposed to be a new model. She looks really weird, right? Go look up pictures of her, or don't. Actually, don't look up. She's AI. I figured it out because there's no actual active footage of her, and even if I saw it, I don't think I would believe it was an actual person, because she so clearly looks like one of these computer-generated models. And now she's made this weird offer that she would go ahead and offer herself to whoever won the French Open as a gift. She's actually starting to sound like a stalker. It's really weird. I'm sure there's some guy somewhere who's like, oh, that's so hot. No, that's like, I mean, that's like Glenn Close Fatal Attraction weird. Like, is she going to show up in your bathtub next? Like, ew. Wow. Anyways, so yeah, I'm not a fan of whatever it is, and I don't think she's an actual person. I think she's an AI generated model. I think some software developers having a lot of fun. Anyway, so I think we've done well. This show's a little short. Everyone's been running too long. I made a point. I decided from now on, since you all really like the song teasers are very popular. I put in an original song last week called You. It's been extremely popular. It has over 100 views in a short period on YouTube for a new channel. And a new thing with me singing on there as well. And I started that within the last month. So I think that's really positive. But I'm also seeing that people would really, really enjoy it if I sang. They really don't want long shows. And everybody knows about YouTube. Kind of like short shows. So and they didn't waste your time on like an hour show or something like that. Don't bother. But anyways, I'm going to sing Tasmin Archer's song Sleeping Satellite, which was in the last teaser I put out earlier today. And I'm going to call it a show. Call this show over. So let's sing this song and be done with this show for the day. I blame you for the moonlit sky and the dream that died with the eagle's flight. I blame you for the moonlit nights when I wonder why are the seas still dry. Don't blame this sleeping satellite. Did we fly to the moon too soon? Did we squander the chance? The rush of the race, the reason we chase is lost in romance. Ooh. And still we try to justify the waste for a taste of man's greatest adventure. Ooh. I blame you for the moonlit sky and the dream that died with the eagle's flight. I blame you for the moonlit nights when I wonder why are the seas still dry. Don't blame this sleeping satellite. Have we lost what it takes to advance? Have we peaked too soon? If the world is so green, then why does it scream under a blue moon? We wonder why, if the earth sacrifices for a prize of its greatest treasure. I blame you for the moonlit sky and the dream that died with the eagle's flight. I blame you for the moonlit nights when I wonder why other seas still dry. Don't blame this sleeping satellite. We shoot for the stars. What a giant step. Have we got what it takes to carry the weight of this concept? Or pass it by like a shot in the dark with the mark with a sense of adventure. Yeah, yeah. Don't blame this sleeping satellite. I blame you for the moonlit sky and the dream that died with the eagle's flight. I blame you for the moonlit nights when I wonder why the seas still dry. Don't blame this sleeping satellite. Oh, yeah, yeah. Oh, yeah. Don't blame this sleeping satellite. Oh, 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 yeah, yeah. Oh, 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 yeah, yeah. Don't blame the sleeping satellite. And that was the Thought Project, just so you know, for today. Have a good one.